You let this happen! You knew! I told you I'd kill him!
Simon, go. Enter the vestry and lock the door. Quickly now. My son, you're in God's house now.
We are talking about the movie Dark Scent. This one is directed by Magnus Wake and stars James Robertson, Siobhan Redmond and Gordon Kennedy. So this is essentially a movie that I guess you can compare to The Dead Zone, obviously the Stephen King novel that was made into a movie with Christopher Walken and obviously a series as well. But in case you are unfamiliar with that, let's give you a brief plot synopsis. So ultimately it follows this young man who has some psychic abilities. Now we see a prologue at the beginning of the movie that he's able to kind of like see the future, and he sees the murder of his local priest and tries to stop it but is unable to. Cut to I think it's like 10-15 years or something later, so he's a young guy, young man, and you know, he has now lived with this gift, this clairvoyance, and decides that he wants to try and track down the killer of this priest, as this killer seems to have started his killing again. He's like a masked serial killer with his own kind of like motives that are based in kind of religion and stuff like that. Now, he sort of sees in a kind of a vision that his own death. So what he does is he tries to prevent that by essentially hiring this ex-military guy to protect him and ultimately physically stop this kind of serial killer in a physical way. Along the way, they have various other run-ins with a couple of other people that may help and hinder their story. Ultimately, you know, climaxing with the confrontation with this masked serial killer. So let's talk about Dark Scent. So it's a low-budget British, maybe Scottish movie that feels like a TV drama. Now, if you're from the UK, you would have seen these kind of like 1 or 2 part serials or mini-series dramas that you have on BBC or ITV, and it feels like one of them. Maybe if this was cut in 2, you could imagine it being like a 2-part, you know, 2-night drama or something. It's a really fascinating story, albeit one we've seen mentioned, like I mentioned, The Dead Zone. The story isn't particularly kind of original maybe, but I really enjoyed the characters here. So we have our main duo, this guy Simon, who is this psychic, who, you know, is basically looked after his sick mother for most of his life, and his kind of relationship with this sort of ex-soldier. Initially it was a little bit rocky, but I really liked their camaraderie and their kind of chemistry, and they kind of make quite a good duo, and I really enjoyed that. And despite the fact that this story is relatively, you know, we've seen very similar stories before, I still enjoyed it. And what I really liked is, I mean, goes a little bit far-fetched sometimes, but the way this Simon tries to kind of like future-proof himself and his kind of soldier friend into, you know, having to deal with ramifications about what they're doing. Of course, things go awry, and as he's trying to kind of fix the kind of like the timeline, so to speak, and fix what's going to happen, he ends up potentially making things worse for him. So I actually found it quite an intriguing storyline. So we've got good characters, we've got, you know, good kind of like twists in the kind of the story. The serial killer himself is pretty menacing. This is kind of like masked guy who has his own stuff going on. We don't see too much of him there. There's a little bit of kind of backstory hinted at, but we don't know too much about him. But nonetheless, you know, there's the scenes where he's killing his victims are fairly brutal, if not particularly kind of explicit. Was there anything that I was not a fan of in this film? So let me ask you that. Let me ask myself that. So yeah, there's a fight scene at the end. The one action sequence in this movie is very poorly handled. The choreography, the way that is kind of directed, it looks like people are playing tag is the best way I can describe it. The action sequence is quite poorly handled, poorly photographed, poorly choreographed, poorly acted. Outside of that one sequence, I would say the quality of the filmmaking is pretty high. But this one sequence, which is, you know, it's a fairly long sequence, is on the poorer side. There are a couple of plot holes here that I was a little bit kind of like bemused by. I don't really understand how Simon is able to get this money to pay this soldier at the beginning. He just seems to magic up £25,000 to pay this soldier ultimately, and that's never really explained where he got that from. And he's looking like he's looking after his mother the whole time, and he can't even afford like a carer. So I don't know how he's got this money, but there you go. And then the powers are a little bit kind of ill-defined, I would say, and the powers tend to be psychic powers, and they seem to be very specific in certain areas, but a little bit wishy-washy in others. So I feel his powers are whatever the story needs them to be, or doesn't need them to be, if that makes sense. Now, apparently this is based on a novel that I haven't read, and there was also made into a short film, which again I hadn't seen. But just based on this film, yeah, the powers seem a little bit inconsistent to me, and kind of are more there for the writer to write whatever needs to happen in the screen. So it's essentially very much a low impact kind of supernatural drama, rather than kind of a horror film, although there are some horror elements here. Very much plays like a TV drama. Definitely has this kind of like that British kind of TV feel to it. But I have to say, I thought the storyline, albeit not particularly original, was thoroughly interesting, with super likeable characters and actors who really, I feel, sell their roles and do a great job, with the exception of that one fight scene. So yeah, it's a kind of a nice sort of like uncomplicated movie to a certain degree. It's not something that's going to kind of like blow your socks off in regards to scale or spectacle or anything like that, but it's kind of a nice film to pop on in the afternoon and kind of enjoy and have fun with the kind of the characters, and at the end of the day you kind of want to see more of them. So it almost feels like this could be like it ends with like, it could be like an ongoing series or something like that, which would be quite fun. And yeah, so I did enjoy this movie. I will say I had some fun with it despite a couple of shortcomings. So 7 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.